Shalom. Welcome to the Chai Academy, coming to you live from the Chai Center. So we have every day, we try and do it often, we have a class, a half-hour class, and sometimes it's an individual class, sometimes it's part of a series, but regardless, each class that we give is independent of the prior one. In other words, you'll be able to understand this class even if you didn't see the previous class. We're currently in the middle of the Holocaust series. The last time we met, we spoke about Joseph Mengele, may he rot. Joseph Mengele, of course, was the butcher of Auschwitz. He was did medical experiments on people, twins and dwarfs, etc. And we discussed his miserable existence and his death. We've discussed many different things. So today's topic we're going to be discussing is Anne Frank. Mengele was a bastard. Anne Frank is a victim, but an interesting victim of the Nazis. Our next class, by the way, we're going to be talking about Kapos and Judenrat, Jews that helped the Nazis. So so we're going to go through many different things. Anne Frank, right, probably of the 6 million Jews that died, the most well-known name is Anne Frank. Right? She's remembered best, right, as a teenager, 14, 15 or so, and she was living in Amsterdam. She was born in Frankfurt, by the way. She was born in Frankfurt, Germany, but they moved to Amsterdam. It's interesting to note when you go to Frankfurt am Main, they have a wall, a huge wall, outside of the Jewish cemetery, and this wall has little plaques of different people, different Jews that died by Nazis in Frankfurt. Anne Frank's name is there, even though she didn't die in Frankfurt, but being that she was such a famous personality, they put her name on this wall as well. And this wall goes on, and the amount of names, it's just terrible. A couple of interesting things about this wall. So it surrounds a cemetery, ancient Jewish cemetery, which eventually leads into a museum. The cemeteries are connected to a museum. It's really strange. Some of the names, right, I don't know, there's 12,000 plaques, something like that. Some of them have been covered up because they found out later they didn't die. They survived the Holocaust. So then it's almost like you have a tooth that goes bad. You put a crown, just cover it. They covered up this plaque, and they crazy glued it on, and you can no longer see the name. They moved to Amsterdam. Her parents moved to Amsterdam together with her sister Margot, and in July 1942, when the Nazis started to begin their deportations from Amsterdam, they went into hiding. It was specifically precipitated by Margot getting a letter that she needs to report, and this was the Nazi MO. They sent a letter saying you need to report to so and so at such a corner or such a building at such a time, and that was pretty much your demise, because you reported 10, 100, 1,000 people reported, and from there you were, some of them were beaten, some of them were killed, and but most of them were shipped off on a train or a bus to a train station, and some were just shot, in the Ukraine. So anyway, Margaret got this thing to report. So that's when Otto Frank, Anne's father, said, okay, it is time to go into hiding. So Anne, her sister Margaret, her parents, and 4 other Jews went into hiding. and they hid in the annex of a, there were a few rooms in this annex, in this attic of this warehouse that Otto Frank used to own. And they were in a few, and basically this was their prison for years, 2 years, at least 2 years. And now Otto himself was a successful businessman, and he owned various different types of businesses, and he was successful. Interesting to note a tidbit of information that I remember reading years ago, that Otto actually worked for Macy's in New York City for a short stint, like in the 1909 or something. And then his father died, so he went back to Germany before World War I. So Otto was this astute businessman, and he had different places they used to own, and etc. So they were in this place. They didn't leave these rooms. There was just a few rooms. You can visit it today. They did not leave these rooms, and they were provided food and necessities by friends, employees, former employees of Otto Frank. They were non-Jews. One non-Jew in particular her name was Miep Gis, and she was very instrumental. We'll talk about her a little bit more, but she was the one of the people that used to provide food and basic necessities to the Frank family. Now, it was a risk to their lives, because if you hid Jews, it was punishable by death. If you helped Jews escape, if you helped Jews survive, it was punishable by death. So these people who helped were actually incredible, righteous people. Recently they came out, by the way, with a woman who's a righteous Gentile, honored in Israel. So Miep was honored in Israel, but was Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth's husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. His mother was a righteous Gentile. She was a nun, and she saved Jews. Just interesting. Anyway, ultimately, they were caught. Now, there's a lot of controversy about how they were caught. So Otto Frank insisted that he was betrayed. He said, "There's no way they could have caught us if we weren't betrayed." And years later, he pointed, Otto himself and his father pointed his fingers at this one and that one, and recently, I don't know if it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they actually did the History Channel together with ex-FBI agents. They did investigations who betrayed the Franks. And while it's unclear, and there was many accusations made over the years, it seems that the person that did put, but there's no evidence, but all fingers point to a person called Ans van Dijk, who was a Jew, and he was actually, after the war, he was executed because he told the Nazis where 145 Jews were hiding. So he was just a skunk, a traitor, and he was executed. I'm not sure who executed him. It was probably individuals, but anybody that assisted the Nazis in killing Jews, the revenge was taken, so it seems to lead to him. But there were others who also, but nobody knows. Otto was convinced, by the way, that it was an ex-employee, that it was somebody who used to work for him. Anyway, so after the deportation, so during this time, those 2 years, Anne Frank wrote a diary, and what happened, Otto Frank, because he was the only survivor out of those 8. Otto Frank, he survived, and he actually writes and tells the tale that when the Nazis came up into where they were hiding, and they saw this this operation, 8 Jews, they asked for the jewelry. He said, we don't have jewelry, but they did see a silver menorah, and they did see, I think, Shabbos candles, Shabbos candle holders, and so the Nazi opened it up, and he put them in his briefcase. He saw papers, a bunch of papers, and he goes, any of this money, any of this banknotes, any of this Deutsche Marks, and what he did was he picked up Anne Frank's diary, and Otto said, no, there's no money there. So the Nazi threw it on the floor, and they dragged out these Jews, and the diary was left on the floor, Anne Frank's writings. This Miep Gis found the diary when she after the Franks had been deported to Bergen-Belsen. She found the diary, and when Otto came out, she gave the diary to him. Now, this diary was so important because it was written in German, but it gave a little insight into what the Holocaust was, why you had to hide, and it was very impactful. Jews were impacted, right, with or without her diary, but it basically gave an eye, a vision, a view into the Holocaust from a first-hand experience. There were first-hand experiences of pictures that they Auschwitz, very famous, right? They drew pictures and hid, but this was kind of a blow by blow of what she lived through, and it was incredible. Ultimately, we know that Anne Frank died. By the way, they were only caught in 44. So they hid from 42 to 44. Anne Frank died March 1945 in Bergen-Belsen. Now, Bergen-Belsen was liberated literally 6 weeks later, or 8 weeks later. It was tragic. The diary was published in 1947. It was published in its original form in the German language in 1947. It was only when it was translated into English and is when it became a bestseller. Right? To date, the Diary of Anne Frank has been translated into 32 languages. One of the most famous lines, because she was clearly a very insightful person. She was a very sensitive person. And she writes, and this is coming from somebody who spent 2 years in basically in a prison, right, with no toilet, right? She writes, in spite of everything, this is a quote, in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. Now, you wonder in Bergen-Belsen if she really felt that way at the end, but this is the way she felt at the time. It was amazing. And that's a line she's most known for, even though there's a certain banality to this line, because the people were not good, and definitely back then they weren't good. The Frank family were extremely secular, and but as you can tell that she had a very strong faith in God, and she was very insightful. And basically, one of the quotes I remember. She writes, if there's still any, first of all, she writes something about God, that who put us in to this predicament? It was God. And God will get us out of the predicament, and he will make us rise again. And then she writes, if there's still any Jews left, they will be held as as a shining example. And who knows? Perhaps after all this is done, Jews and the Jewish religion will bring forth goodness into the world. It was translated. This diary was translated into English by a fellow by the name of Meyer Levin. He was a novelist, and he was responsible for the translation and for the book being published. He also was responsible, initially responsible. He got the rights from Otto Frank to make it into a play, and the play that he wrote for Broadway really depicted very accurately what Anne Frank wrote and what she wished to convey. And then injustice occurred, like, tragedy upon tragedy. So a woman who was a playwright, actor, very, very influential on Broadway in her time, her name is Lillian Hellman, right? I think she wrote a play called The Children's Hour, really debased story. If you've ever read there's a lot of sexual impropriety. But Lillian Hellman went over to Otto Frank and said, "Look, it cannot, a play can't be as written. The way it's written, the way that May 11 did it, it would never sell. Let me do it." So Otto let her do it. However, and this is the tragedy, she did not keep true to its form. Right? She was, first of all, if you can Google her, she was a pro-Stalinist. She was a communist, and she took out many of the beautiful things that Anne Frank wrote. For example, Anne Frank, and I wrote this in my article yesterday, that Jewish ideals are the root cause of anti-Semitism and the root cause for Hitler. She wrote that, and I agree with it 1,000%. And so what Hitler wanted to do was kill the messenger, and hopefully the message. So Anne Frank wrote that in her, and she was 15. Lillian Hellman took it out. She took it out, and she replaced it with? She replaced it with such a benign, uninspiring line. And she writes as follows. And Anne Frank never said these lines, never. And I wrote it down. He says, "We are not the only people that had to suffer. Sometimes it's this people, this race, and sometimes it's another." It completely negated what Anne Frank's message. Completely negated. Anne Frank's message was clear, that the Jewish ideals is what caused anti-Semitism. She said, "No, this is arbitrary. Sometimes it's this race and sometimes it's that race." To me, unforgivable. Lillian Hellman did the most unforgivable thing. If Anne Frank was alive today, she probably would have been in her 90s, I assume, maybe 90 something. We view her as literally as a 15, 16-year-old kid, because she's frozen in time. But she is, she would have been in the 90s. We actually, a few years ago, brought out her sister, right, Eva Schloss, to speak. This is her stepsister, because her father, Otto, remarried, and this is a stepsister, and she grew up with Anne, and she tells tales, and she's in her 90s. Frail woman, but very, very strong. Today you can visit the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam. You come into Amsterdam and you have to actually climb like a ladder, a captain's ladder. Not like this is a ladder, but somewhat at an angle, but still pretty steep. If you want to see where Anne Frank lived, she is, as I said, she really got the message that there was a Holocaust happening. So the Holocaust deniers, and the Holocaust deniers right away, right after the war ended, immediately the Holocaust deniers. I mean, first of all, the Germans burnt and buried and destroyed, as much as they could, right? That they kept them, they took the ashes and they buried them and poured lye over them, and right. But Anne Frank's diary remained, and she wrote her tales. She wrote of what happened, what occurred, and what her life consisted of as a Jew. Um, by the way, because it's interesting, because of the concern of the Holocaust deniers. So what the Allied leader Dwight Eisenhower, what he did, is he made, aside from, he got the populace, the Polish and the German civilians to take a tour of the crematorium and a tour of the gas chambers. In addition, he documented. He made them take pictures and videos of dead bodies, skeletons, or emaciated bodies, look like skeletons, which are 40 feet in the air. He did that because he knew they were going to be Holocaust deniers. There's actually a story with him, going off on a tangent, but he picked up an 8-year-old kid, emaciated kid, a Jewish kid, and he was extremely overcome with emotion. He was a good man, by the way, unlike Roosevelt. And he was very overcome with emotion. He picked up this 8-year-old kid, and he screamed, and he shouted, "This was a threat! This is why he deserved death! He's a threat, huh?" And it was a very emotional time. Anyway, so Anne Frank's diary, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. There's some humor there, there's some hormones there, but it is it's definitely a testament to the time. As we concluded yesterday, is that the Mishnah says, "Al tishkach min haperonis," don't give up hope. Anybody who we think escaped punishment did not escape punishment, and that's what keeps me going. There are many. First of all, if you have any questions, you can ask here, or you can ask at rabbi@thechaicenter.com. If you would like to see previous classes, previous courses, you can do youtube.com/chaitube, CHAI2, or thechaicenter.com/academy. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, and therefore you'll be notified when a new class gets put on. A little bit of news, not really related to the Chai Academy, but a book that I wrote called The Kabbalah of Life has just been published, and it will hit Amazon in a couple of weeks. So The Kabbalah of Life by Yaakov Sachs, and it's one man's pensive musings about current events and what Judaism has to say. And you can pre-order it, and even if you don't order it, if you search it, Amazon will print in anticipation, which is a good thing. God bless. Any questions, Rabbi at the Chai Center. And once again, the book is called, and this is how you can find it. Hopefully this is my first book of many. Love to teach. God bless.